Good afternoon. I always have to look and see what day it is. The January 6th meeting of the Oklahoma City Water Utilities Trust will be in order. First item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the previous meeting.
Second.
Motion and second to approve the minutes. Are there comments, questions, corrections, additions? Hearing none, voting please. Minutes are approved. Next item is the consent docket.
Move approval subject to individual consideration.
Second.
Have a motion and a second on the consent docket. Are there matters to be discussed separately or comments, staff?
Mr. Chairman, just a general sort of question. We've had a couple of projects in here in today's packet where we had significant increases in engineering costs. For instance, H, the original contract was $250,000, and we had an amendment number 1 of $1.9 million. Is there a fixed point in time where you rebid those contracts? And I understand you have somebody working on the project, but does that give them a right to do these sort of things?
No, interestingly, it doesn't. So when we typically when we engage in an engineering contract, if we're designing infrastructure, we're first going to look at the scope of the infrastructure and have a preliminary budget project definition developed that investigates the identified needed improvements during the capital program, how they'll fit into the area where we'll be building, and then how those will fit together in plant operations, for example. So it's a kind of it's a more than we know we need X, Y, Z into how you might prosecute X, Y, Z, but before the design proceeds. In different corporations, they call it different things. My experience, it's kind of a preliminary budget definition. 25 might be a 15 to 25% engineering work. Then the detailed work is going on in this contract, where we're talking about getting into the nuts and bolts design. How big will the tanks be? Where will they sit? What structural support will they need? The very detailed work that's necessary to put out plans for bidding.
Do you ever look at the consultants at that point in time?
Yes.
After the preliminary work's been done?
Yes, absolutely. And it is not, and we're very clear about that, I think, as a corporation, that it's not a guarantee that you'll be doing that work.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions on the consent docket? Voting please. Consent docket's approved. Next item is the concurrence docket.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second on the concurrence docket. Any comments or questions? Voting please. Consent docket's approved. Next item is items for individual consideration, and I understand we do not need executive session. Is that right?
That's correct.
Move to strike.
Second.
Motion and a second to strike. Item 4 is stricken. Next item is items from trustees. Any comments from trustees? Hearing none. General Manager's report. Presentation by staff.
Nathan Madenwald is here with us this afternoon. Nathan is the lead engineer responsible for our responses to the Planning Commission, to whose staff reviews plans proposed for land development. And he's been working for some time with the city's planning department, providing information about the water and wastewater systems, actually as well as the solid waste systems, to Plan OKC. I know that you're familiar with Plan OKC. I'm going to let Nathan talk about it, but I want you to get a sense of the kinds of information we've been providing.
Thank you, Marcia. Good afternoon, Chairman and trustees. As Marcia said, you guys have been briefed on this plan already, but we'll just give you a brief overview on some of the things that we've done as part of the Plan OKC process. So, primarily, these were some of the key steps that we were involved in during the Plan OKC process. There were some initial meetings at the outset of Plan OKC. Then after the public participation process, we were involved in draft policies and review of some of those. Then we evaluated development scenarios that were generated, including infrastructure and capital costs required to serve those. And then I'll run through some next steps that we've got to do on the plan still to move forward. For the working groups that was begun in 2010, we were involved in two main groups, primarily the SQUARE group, which included land use, transportation, environmental, and then also economic development. And then we were involved in the Triangle group, which focused on parks, serving Oklahoma City, and living in Oklahoma City communities. The initial meetings were for us to provide comments prior to the public participation process. For instance, how facilities, water and sewer are extended to new developments, and we provided that information. So in 2013, following the public participation process, policies were generated, and we were given those to review. And we had several staff members spend quite a bit of time looking at those and kind of aligning those with the way we operate and the way our system works. So, and we provided comments and revisions to those policies for the incorporation into Plan OKC. Probably where we spent the most amount of time, though, was on the several development scenarios that were generated for the draft plan. We provided initially service availability information for water and wastewater facilities prior to generation of the scenarios, where we have capacity, where we have treatment plants, where we feel we are able to serve. And then scenarios were developed by staff to show different levels of development based on current trends, and then also looking at efficiency scenarios where we're closer to our infrastructure and other facilities. And we provided infrastructure estimates necessary to serve those proposed development patterns, all three of them, and then including capital costs that were for those infrastructure improvements. So here's a figure that shows water service availability information that was used to develop the development scenarios. Specifically, you can see the water system on this map here, and you can see where they show we are able to serve. It's a draft plan, so we feel that there may be some revisions to this, but this gives you an idea of the information that was used for them to develop their scenarios. Similarly, on the wastewater side, they provided a figures showing where our facilities are, and we provide information on where else we feel that we can serve based on those existing facilities, our capital plans, and our wastewater treatment plans. So they use this information to develop their scenarios, and then we provided capital costs necessary in infrastructure to serve those scenarios. So where we see next steps for us to participate on this is we have the draft plan in our possession, and we're reviewing that now. We're going to provide comments back to staff on that here in early 2015, and actually we're targeting end of the month, hopefully, to provide those comments back. I know that's very short and sweet, but at this time I'll address any questions you may have.
So the plan goes to policymakers at sometime during 2015, we believe, perhaps in the summer, if I understand correctly?
I believe so, yes. They're getting ready to put it out for public comment at this point.
And at that point, it is the city's comprehensive plan. Staff will visit with you about, I think at the planning staff, you'll be invited to participate, and then the utility staff will visit with you about the plan and what it means to our overall long-range plans as we see them now, and the context in which the information's been developed.
Let me ask you a question about the categories, the hardest to serve. Obviously, the easiest to serve have to do with, or at least it seems to me, the easiest to serve in both water and sewer would have to do with the availability of existing things in the ground already.
Correct, sir.
How is the hardest to serve? What's the number one criteria for the hardest to serve part?
We looked at it a couple different ways on the water where we don't have facilities in the area, where we're at the extent of our system. For instance, like looking at this water service availability map, if you look on the far west side of town, we don't have facilities, and our master plan hasn't ever really looked at a lot of growth west of where our current extent of the system is. So for us to do that, then you're talking about bringing infrastructure all the way, or doing some significant infrastructure improvements to get water further out there. And on that, like similarly on the wastewater side, we see that same problem on that far west side of town. There isn't a wastewater treatment plant to handle that. So, and there's a drainage basin that flows to the north, so we would have to look at special improvements to handle the wastewater in those locations. So,
It just seems to me that it's easier to make that distinction on the wastewater side because you got to have some place to put the water after you've treated it.
yes, sir.
And the difficulty that I see in the far northeast and the far southeast is obviously there's no place for it to go.
Yeah.
The concern I have about on the water side is the water side just a function of extending lines there? The further out from where an existing line is, that means you're harder to serve than closer?
Yeah, yes, in the case, for example, of Ward 4, we have great transmission mains coming both north and south from the Draper Water Treatment Plant, but we
Right.
don't have subsequent smaller mains going east, for example. So
I guess my point is that if you had this map 25 years ago, would it have looked like this? My guess is it wouldn't have. It's because of what we've done in the last 25 years makes it easier to serve one place as opposed to another. So we have really control on the water side of what's easy to serve and what's not, unless we want to build a canal to the North Canadian from 104th and Harrow-Newalla Road. But is that a fair assumption?
I think that is, I mean, you have more flexibility on the water and where you want to take that, so, and you can change your situation easier than you can on the wastewater side.
Thank you.
On this map of water service availability, where is the Deer Creek area?
I'm so sorry?
Where's the Deer Creek area on the map? Does it show on this map?
It doesn't include any areas outside of the incorporated area for Oklahoma City. So this map was generated for the plan specifically, just the incorporated area of Oklahoma City.
We'll get you a map that overlays with the Deer Creek Water Company. The Deer Creek Water Company does extend into Oklahoma City, and there are some areas developed in Ward 8, I think, that are served by the Deer Creek Water Company. There are some other areas immediately outside the city, served by Deer Creek. But we'll bring you that map because it's been confusing, I think.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Last item on the agenda is a citizen to be heard, Barbara Rupert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and trustees.
We need your name and address for the record, please.
Say my name. It's Barbara Rupert, and I live at 3917 Northwest 70th Street in Oklahoma City.
Thank you.
And I'm here with some questions and comments after, sort of the aftermath of the drilling controversy that was just resolved by the withdrawal of the application by Pedestal Oil Company to drill on the south shore of Lake Hefner. Although that particular application is moot because it's been withdrawn, I believe that the issues concerning the process for considering drilling applications is not moot, and that there is also a previous application that has never been resolved, although it may be determined that it was abandoned or something. I don't know. But back in July of 2011, a man named Mark Svoboda applied for a drilling location on the south side of the Lake Road. And I would like to commend the staff of the Utilities Trust because their response and recommendation to that first application, which was frequently cited in the process on the subsequent application by Pedestal, was that the July proposal be denied because it was incompatible with the Lake Hefner master plan. And Ms. Slaughter specified and expanded upon that with the reasons why it was not compatible. However, the trustees exercised their discretion under the rules to not accept the recommendation of the staff, which I believe was an egregious mistake that could have avoided everything that happened later. And it was moved by trustee Mr. Ryan to defer it indefinitely and the staff was directed to discuss this with the lake users. And that's what led to the meeting in September of 2011. And at that point, after that meeting, Ms. Slaughter submitted a memo, I guess at one of the November meetings, to the trustees, basically summarizing that the meeting was well attended and that there were concerns offered by the community, and no action was taken on that report. You all received the report, and that was it. So this first proposal was never ruled on, and it was not denied. And then a couple months later, or a few months later, in January of 2012, was when the pedestal proposal was submitted. Now, on this VOTA proposal, it was pretty easy to find those documents on the wonderful SIRE computer program that the city has. I could not find, I got kind of 2 points. I could never find anything where the pedestal proposal was ever on the agenda before the trustees, which might explain why Chairman White said that he'd never seen it at the previous meeting in December, when our concerns began to be expressed. And I'm really sorry for the misinterpretation or controversy on that, because I do agree with the individual who commented that the trustees could have stopped this if it had been on the agenda and the same process had been followed as with the Svoboda proposal. Okay? I have an issue with something that happened after the meeting, the trustees meeting on December 16th, because some of the citizens talked to some of the staff who were very open and willing to share, but we were told by the general counsel that the initial proposal had been denied, not because of public comments at the meeting, but because it didn't meet the rules. Now, and I remember this explicitly because we were surprised, and we were told that that one had been denied. Having looked at the record, I just would like to put it on the record that I don't believe, I'm not saying it was a lie, okay, I'm not saying that, but I think that we were given erroneous information. That as citizens, we are trying to figure out what happened and how things work here, okay? And I feel that we were not treated properly or fairly with that information. And my other concern is, like I said, although the pedestal application is specifically moot because it was withdrawn, I might be mistaken, it might have appeared on the agenda at some point, but it was allowed to proceed to the point that, as in the pedestal application, a big part of it was reprinting the rules of the trust on how applications are processed. And in Exhibit B of the pedestal application, which was submitted in January of 2012, it lists the the approval requirements for a proposal. And the first step, according to their exhibit and their interpretation of the rules, was to have a lease, surface use and easement agreement. That there was some debate at the public meetings about what the first step of the approval process is, and it was suggested that the public meeting should have been held before it got to the drafting and negotiating of an agreement to be submitted. And that is a process as described in the pedestal document. That makes sense, that it would go to you all as an agenda item to then authorize the staff to enter into this negotiation and agreement. So, although...
Before any public meetings at that point?
What I'm saying is that you would have the public meeting before you decided to use all the staff time to come up with the agreement, because that's part of moving forward with the approval process. That is how it was handled. I'm sorry for talking quickly, but that was how basically the Svoboda application was handled. I don't really have a problem with the way that initial 2011 proposal was handled, because you had the public meeting before a decision was made as to whether or not to proceed with the agreement. And since it never appeared on the agenda again, and was mentioned at the public meeting on the pedestal project in December, that it just kind of went away. It didn't really go away, just nobody ever moved forward after the memo from the public meeting was submitted to you all. But that process made sense and was in proper order. The pedestal proposal, although specifically moot, from what I could tell, was handled completely differently. It popped up with this draft agreement that everybody talked about, and there had been no meeting before that draft agreement. And this is, like I say, the process questions are not moot. Okay? There has never been a resolution or decision on the Swoboda, and there's nothing to prevent somebody from bringing another application, and I've heard nothing. I've never seen, it's not on the agenda today. It wasn't on the agenda. The pedestal proposal specifically was not on your agenda in December. I have never been, it might be there somewhere back there. I found the other stuff, but I couldn't find that. And I think that's a problem.
Are you suggesting that people shouldn't be able to bring an application at any point in time?
Should not?
Yeah.
At this point, no. I'm not suggesting that at all. I think that there's nothing to prevent that.
The process has to begin somewhere.
And
So a company brings an application.
Right.
We ask the staff to visit with them about the details of the application. In Swoboda, we specifically said, we're not going to do anything until the public participates.
Right.
So in this process, they brought the application, staff started to talk to them, they said, we really ought to get the public input. We did that.
Yes.
And they withdrew the application.
I did not see anything where they withdrew that application. All I saw was that, the only record was that nothing further happened on it.
No, I'm talking about pedestal.
I'm talking about the Swoboda proposal.
I understand, but you've linked them together.
Because
and what I'm suggesting is that what we did as a body in 2011 when it came to us was said, well, where's been the public input? And they said there hadn't been any. And we said, you need to have public input. You need to meet with the lake users, and they did, right?
And that's a good thing.
That's right. And so this time, the application's brought, staff is talking to them, they have the public meeting, they let people know, nothing had come before this body prior to the public meeting, notwithstanding the allegations of many that this was a railroaded deal and it was greased and that the commission and the trust had already decided to do this. Nothing had been brought to this body, and I can tell you that these members wouldn't have voted on anything before the public had a chance to comment, and they did. As a result of that meeting, Pedestal said, we're not going to pursue our application. The process worked. I don't understand the concerns about the process. I understand the concerns people have about drilling oil wells and natural gas wells near water supply. I get that. Mm-hmm. The process worked. People had a chance to participate. They were not denied their opportunity to express their concerns. There were public meetings. If there had been asked for additional public meetings, I have no doubt staff would have found time to meet however many times was necessary. The process worked because Pedestal looked at it, saw the feedback, and decided that maybe they didn't want to go forward. So I have a little trouble with the concept that the process is somehow skewed or flawed to prevent people from participating because, in fact, it worked.
Yes, but from the public perspective, what was different about this, and I live on Northwest 70th, so we back on the Greenbelt, and so I'm part of the neighborhood association where when you get notice, you'll give it to Edgewater Lake Point, because we are immediate, and I was aware of this Swoboda meeting. I couldn't attend that, but there wasn't this sense of time pressure where it's going to be presented in January and that there was an agreement, a draft agreement, and I don't want to get into some of the specific issues with kind of went awry with that meeting, because I think that's something that everybody's learned from, not to do it quite that way again. But it's just the issue that I have is that from what we were told was that the staff had already been directed to negotiate, draft an agreement. I was talking to Mr. Keith. It sounded like you guys have been really working hard on it, and which I respect the work that you did, But it was, to me, that aspect was the cart before the horse that could have relieved a lot of the pressure and that sense of urgency why people, had to act then. So, we may have to agree to disagree on that point, but from the public perspective, that, I believe, was part of the problem. Because when we heard that, that was different. Having an agreement draft sitting that our understanding was it was going to be presented, the meeting was on December 18th, and it was going to be presented in January.
Well, I think the sense of urgency was created by those in opposition. There was never a sense of urgency on the part of this body that they had to act in January. I myself was not aware of the issue even being considered to be put on the agenda until such time as I saw the activity on TV. Because I can assure you, if it had come to us in January, where they said, we've negotiated this deal, and the trustees had said, well, have you had public meetings, have you gotten public input? And they said no, we would have done like we did in Svoboda and said, we're going to defer it until such time as you get public input, because that's how this process works.
Okay. Okay. But I feel like you're not, actually, I feel like you're not here, because I do hear you. I believe I hear you.
Okay.
Mr. Graves, okay? But the aspect that I don't think that you are hearing from me is that we didn't stir, as one member of the public, we didn't stir up the idea that there was an agreement that had been drafted. As a citizen, I do not understand how it got to the point that all the work on the agreement was being done before you even had the public input, because for no other reason than this was an incredible waste of time on the part of the staff. And I want to see you all, I know they're overworked. I mean, I just can't imagine that they're not. And I did not understand at that time, it just did not make sense to me that the staff would have been directed, either one, that the staff would have been directed to enter into the negotiations without there having been the public meeting first on the general concept, because the application existed. The information about where the drilling was going to be already existed. And the example with the Svoboda proposal was that, again, the information existed where they wanted to drill. You all had issues with it. I could not see. Maybe one of the problems is you can never tell on the agenda when something has been withdrawn. There's like no record of it. There's no actual, to my knowledge, official record, that somebody could look up that the pedestal proposal was withdrawn. And all of that kind of record keeping, and then the issue of having the meeting before the draft agreement effort was put out is where I believe that see what I mean? You get what I'm talking about?
I understand exactly.
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying. Now, in my response would be that as a result of what we learned in the process with Svoboda, the staff knew of the general public concerns about these locations and these type of issues, and had very specific questions and points that had to be addressed before we'd go any further. And I think that's why you saw the detailed discussions that went into, if we're going to do this, let's talk about the detailed agreements we want to see. I mean, I don't have a problem with people talking to each other and formulating policies and proposing things back and forth. I see nothing underhanded. I see nothing nefarious. I see nothing wrong with that process of sitting down in advance of these meetings and trying to come to terms. Because if in the first meeting the staff had said, well, here's some minimum things you got to do, and they go, well, screw you, we're not going to do that, then it's done. But you don't know until you have those conversations. So you got to sit down and work on agreements. So I don't have a problem at all with the way the staff handled sitting down with someone who expressed an interest in drilling a well. Because I know, at the end of the day, that's got to go before the public for input and processing on the staff's part in case we miss something and there is something that should be added to an agreement. And if they're all happy from their professional standpoint, it meets all the ordinances, all the state requirements, whatever it might be, and they bring it to the trust, then the trust has a second look at it to decide in our capacity as trustees whether or not. So the process will work, the public hearing will work. We can disagree about whether we think it's appropriate or not to drill a well there and using whatever safeguards and technologies. And I have, in a previous life, had lots of people mad at me over oil and gas drilling decisions that were made before. So I'm familiar with that there can be differences of opinion over those kind of things. But I can't stress enough that I think the process was appropriate, and I think it allowed for as much participation as people wanted to bring, and if there had been a need for additional participation, I promise you the trustees would have said, let's have more meetings. Let's give everybody a chance to voice their concerns and opinions. At the end of the day, we may or may not have adopted those concerns into some form of policy proposal.
And I just want to say, I never believed that there was anything nefarious. I want to reassure you that in my mind, it was never an issue of being underhanded or greasing the system.
There was certainly a tone of that in some of the public comments.
Yeah, that wasn't me. I don't think that was me.
I'm not suggesting it was you, but among others that were out there, there was this tone that, here we go, business as usual, they're working some deal.
Right.
And that's wrong.
And I agree with you.
Okay.
I do. I 100% agree with you. The one thing that this comes back to, though, is based on the information after the meeting, from talking to Mr. Keith, is that what I heard was that if, it's kind of like what you were saying, is that if it followed the rules, again, I didn't know that you would do this on your own motion as staff to enter into the agreement, but we were specifically told that public input had nothing to do with the decision. And that, I'm leaving that open.
Just for the record, the staff can't enter into an agreement.
They can draft it, though.
That's different.
Right.
That's their job. That's their job, is to draft agreements.
Right.
And to process applications and bring them for our consideration. There's nothing wrong with them sitting down and going over the details of, here's what we want to see in a deal. And they either agree to that or they don't, right? And then you take that to a public meeting and you say, here's what we're talking about, what do you think? And clearly in this case the reaction was no.
Clearly. That's where we stand on that. I'll just go ahead, just in the interest of repeating, I'm sorry, is that the pedestal proposal was handled differently. Actually, in the conversations about the proposals, I initially thought that I thought that the first proposal was actually a pedestal proposal and that this might have been a continuation of that, but it wasn't even a continuation of the pedestal proposal. It was an entirely new proposal that was handled differently from the Swoboda proposal, and the way that one turned out, except that there was never any ruling on it, and that you guys didn't accept the recommendation of the staff, which I 100% endorse, their initial recommendation, that, and this just may be where we disagree, is that it was an opportunity missed to establish rules and what the role of the Lake Hefner Master Plan is in establishing and avoiding this in the future on drilling proposals on the reservation property, especially the areas that are dedicated for actual recreation.
Again, I guess I'm confused that somehow we weren't following the master plan, or its considerations were not considered in this discussion, because, in fact, those issues were raised, and Pedestal, upon looking at it, withdrew the application, realizing from their perspective that perhaps it couldn't comply. Okay? I mean, again, it bothers me that there's some inference that we were going to ignore or not follow or not consider the Lake Hefner Master Plan.
Just say that's what it looks like to me.
That's fine. And I'm just saying, and I'm just telling you that that's never been the intention of this body, certainly not this member of this body. And we can disagree as to whether or not it complies or not, but it's never been the intention to just ignore something like that. And the whole reason we had staff out talking in specific, detailed fashion with the applicant was to figure out exactly what they wanted to do. Let's hear your plans in detail, and then we're going to go talk to folks and see what they say.
Okay. Thank you. And just, it's not the way it looks. I mean, as far as that one. So that's what I have, and I just would request that the trustees look at the master plan and come up perhaps as an agenda item someday, how any drilling proposal could possibly comply with the master plan. And if you look at Ms. Slaughter's rationale on the Swoboda proposal, I think that would give you great guidance. So, thank you very much.
For the trust?
Mr. Chairman, we received bond ratings from Standard & Poor's and Moody's, as you know. We're really excited about that, and we're preparing to set pricing sometime next week with proceeds. And we have some projects ready to go to bid, completed it in the hopper to go to bid once, so we get some replenished capital funds to fund this fiscal year's capital program.
Anything else? I would say this, and I sent you a text after I got that notice. I am very pleased at the way the finances of the trust have been handled in the last several years. They are really, we wouldn't be in as good a position as we're in today if it weren't for that. And I personally appreciate it. I know other members of the trust do too. Anything else?